So, is Black Myth Wukong worth buying? Is it worth playing? What's in it for you when you jump in? And what can you expect in as kind of concise as possible for this video? Let's try and break it down. So, Black Myth Wukong is being compared to Dark Souls games. It's like a Souls-like game. There are similarities, but I think that we need to talk more about the differences, and that will help you decide whether or not to buy this game. So I'm going to split this into 4 parts: the exploration part, the combat part, the graphics, and the story. So let's start with exploration and the RPG elements and the overall feel of what it's like to play Black Myth Wukong. I think this part's going to give you a better idea of whether or not it's worth buying this game. Now, this game is split into 6 different chapters. The first chapter feels really on the rails. You kind of follow this very specific path. The game feels a little bit boring in terms of like its scale and scope, but it's just the beginning. You get a taste of what the game is to come, but it really doesn't start to open up until chapter 2, where it's starting to feel a bit more open. It's not an open world, but you do get this large map to play in and explore. You can collect items to craft medicine. You can take down optional bosses to get extra abilities, which are called spirits. And you can fight different creatures to get more money and currency, and basically approach each chapter in any way you please. Now, there is a certain way to kind of progress till the end of the chapter, but not everything is like compulsory. There are a lot of optional elements. For example, in chapter 2, there is a mission where you can sort of speak to this pig and go do a couple like fetch quests, and if you solve that quest, it'll open up a whole different timeline where you sort of go back in the past and fight a different boss, and that determines or gives you an item which you can then use to fight the final boss of chapter 2 and have a bit of an advantage. But you don't have to do that. And there's also another boss. You fight a couple different tigers, but apparently there's a third tiger boss hidden as well. So there's a lot of hidden bosses, there are a lot of optional bosses, and a lot of different routes that you can choose to take. And it's more of a game of exploration and just taking whichever path you feel sees, whichever one you want to. And that will determine the pace of your story. Now, there's a bit of a problem with that. The exploration elements kind of get a bit confusing. Sometimes you're left wondering where to go and what to do, and you really try to avoid opening up the internet to find the solutions because you want to try to experience the game in your own way. But there will be moments where you just feel a bit stuck because there is a very sort of lack of direction in terms of what you need to do and where you need to go in some areas. And I think that's part of the joy of the game. But that will certainly need to be you'll have to make up your mind on whether you want to spend time figuring it out or just look up tutorials online on how to get from point A to point B just a little bit. So now that we've kind of broken down the exploration, let's talk about combat. Combat can be fun and rewarding, as equally as it can be frustrating, much in the way a lot of Souls-like games are. Now, this isn't a traditional Souls-like game. I do want to mention that. But I have spent countless hours fighting bosses over and over and over again until I've gotten their attack patterns down and figured out how to take them out. But at the same time, there is a lot of sort of extra abilities. You get many different spells that you can activate that give you a massive advantage in fights and turn the sort of slow-paced dodging and maneuvering around enemies into just a massive mess of hack and slash madness. And sometimes that ends up working better than trying to time things and dodge. So you have these moments in combat where it feels sort of very much like you need to perfect timing and work out everything. And then you have those spells to sort of just give you a little bit of an edge and allow you to make a few mistakes, which is pretty cool. Overall, I would say the combat was enjoyable. There were some bosses where I started to feel like the attack patterns felt similar to other bosses, but overall the character design for the bosses is awesome, and the overall sort of art style is great, which leads me on to the graphics. The graphics for this game are really, really amazing. It's not just like how the game looks, but all of the detail gone into all of the characters, all of the motion for when characters are speaking and moving, and a lot of the cutscenes are very cinematic. And there are some really awesome moments where you're fighting an enemy and then it transitions into a cutscene and it feels very fluid. And I think the overall animation style for the fights as well feel very cinematic on top of that. So just for like a visual experience, it's really, really amazing. And it's probably one of the better games I've played in a long time for that experience. And on top of this isn't really related to the graphics, but the sound design is amazing as well. And I do find that I'm just lost in this world. It's really, really great. You don't feel like you're wondering about the quality of the game much because it's just that good when it comes to graphics. And you, if you enjoy the story side of things, the graphics, the overall like experience, then you're going to enjoy this game. There may be not the best combat in the world. You may feel like it's not quite there in terms of comparing it to, say, Elden Ring, but you know, that's okay. The overall experience is quite a nice package, and I think most of you will enjoy it if you've played any sort of action RPG games. You may at times feel like I say, the combat may feel a little bit less there, so when compared to other games in the genre. But that's probably the only lackluster part of it, if you could call it lackluster. Now, the story itself, it's very much inspired by Journey to the West, a Chinese novel, a very, very old story that's very famous in Asia and China. And I think the telling of the story is really awesome. You do have to focus a lot to understand it because a lot of it is done through sort of cinematography and less so, and I guess a lot more of like poetry, and the words used are not just like explaining the story in such a simple way. So it's something that you really want to be able to put your focus on. And for me, I put it in Chinese dub, the original language. I think it sounds a lot better. It's a lot more enjoyable like that, as opposed to doing the English dubbing for it, as this is a Chinese developed game. Overall, I think the experience is pretty awesome. And for most of you, if you've ever enjoyed an action RPG or you like experiencing that side of things, you're going to like this game. You know, the graphics, story, really great. The whole exploration and RPG elements are really great. The combat is pretty awesome, if not the best, perhaps not the best in the world, but pretty great. So yeah, I got to really highly rate this game. I can't really point out any elements that are bad. And also, one thing I want to touch on is the replayability. You can go through this game and miss out on a lot of optional bosses, a lot of secret bosses, a lot of areas that you would just never know about unless you stumble across different things or perhaps even look online on how to do them. So you can replay this game. There's a lot of replayability. It's certainly worth the price. And I really do think it's a great, awesome experience. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the comments. Cheerio.